That runoff is coming from up on the plateau. Follow up the plateau northwest of the Sfinx, you ultimately hit the Great Pyramid. The natural topography is the water would run down the back of the Sfinx enclosure, and that's where you see the greatest amount of water precipitation weathering. To have that surface hydrology, you need to have the plateau relatively intact. Now, if you look, currently there's a big quarry interrupting the water flow. So we know that the water flow that was causing that weathering had to occur before that quarry existed. That quarry is well known Egyptologically by inscriptions, etc. That was a quarry that was used when the Great Pyramid was built. So that means that the Sfinx must have been carved earlier. The water was still running off, running down the back of the enclosure wall and causing that weathering before that quarry was a quarry, which means that occurs before the Great Pyramid was built. Basically, we have right there disrupted the traditional chronology.
Even Egyptologists agree that the Giza Plateau has a unified ground plan. How does the Great Pyramid display evidence of this correlation?
I do think when it was what we would call partially built, it was used as an astronomical observatory. The Grand Gallery, perfectly aligned north-south, opening to the southern sky, would have made a wonderful observational tube, essentially, looking up into the sky.
We have shafts pointing to certain stars, Orion's Belt, Sirius. We know the stars because they're mentioned in the text. We therefore can use precession astronomy to place the stars back in alignment with these monuments, in this case the pyramids, for example.
The Great Pyramid stands exactly at the center of the largest land mass on the planet. Yet, we had no idea of the position of continents until 600 years ago. How could they have known?
I've shown that Giza, if interpreted as being Orion's belt counterpart, then the layout of the three pyramids, as they are to the ground meridian, would fit the celestial meridian of these stars at 10,500 BC. They reach the very lowest point in their up and down move. Looking east, you had the Sfinx looking at the constellation of Leo. So you have two major monuments on the same site, looking at constellations that are representative of these features on the ground in the sky. We have evidence that they did it, and the alignments were there. Now, could the pyramid builders have been aware of these alignments? Or why not?
With this evidence, it would seem that it's time to rethink what we've been told.
Here we are at Abu Ghraib. You can see that there's no road, no ticket booth, no nothing. This is a very isolated area. And we're going to walk through a mango grove. If you were to get on a camel and ride south from Giza Plateau, you'd come up over the sand dune and see these other pyramids. So as we approach up here, you see a pile of rubble, but really what it is the base of the largest obelisk that ever was in Egypt. Well, here we come up to the platform of the crystal altar. You can see that it's made of quartz, if you look up close here. These little bits of crystal are coming right off it. And then We have a laser cut 6-foot circle in the middle. And then these points, these huge slabs, these pointing to the 4 cardinal directions, made out of single solid pieces of quartz. So here we have some stone basins that were found by Sir Walter Emery years and years ago, and the Department of Antiquities lined all these up with the idea of maybe bringing them to the museum, and they really didn't know what to call them or what they were, so they just decided to leave them here, and they've been here ever since. But if you look at the features on these, they're actually made out of quartz crystal. We'll look up close at some of the places, but when there's little fragments that break off, it's actually a hunk of quartz. And there are these little holes inside, and they say that they were for animal sacrifices and the blood would drip through. I don't know. I really don't think that's what happened. No one has ever come up with a theory that satisfies me about what they're for.
Is there anyone who knows more about this area? Hakim Awiyan is an indigenous wisdom keeper who was born in the village of Abu Sir. He trained in Europe as an archaeologist. Hakim lived his whole life in the area known as the Band of Peace. The Giza Plateau was his front yard.
1936-37, the Sfinx then was covered with sand up to the neck, and there was my playing yard. There are tunnels. I used to walk in these tunnels. In water, I used to crawl sometime because it's narrow.
At Abu Jarab, we have a crystal altar, a round disc in the middle of 4, a symbol of Hotep, and the word Hotep means peace and food. This round disc, it's a lid on a shaft about 180 feet deep to the level of the ocean. And that is still running water in there, and you can feel it while you're in the area.
These instruments were not found in a line like you see today, it's 9 of them, but they found around the area. And there is still some more to be found.
And then we have oldest obelisk located in Egypt. Next to that altar, what's left of the what you call hieroglyph writing, that's a Sufi writing. It has the obelisk and the disc of the sun and words saying the heart of the sun. Ibra.
Arriving at Abu Sir, we can imagine the ancient priests and priestesses who trained as high-level initiates here. Just as we have monks, nuns, and priests nowadays, the ancients trained initiates in ritual practices that served the highest good of mankind.
Here we are at Abu Sir, and it's very obvious. You can see the old riverbed. You can see the pyramids of Saqqara and the pyramids of Giza from here. But more importantly, you can see the old causeway, and you can imagine that boats used to come along the river, and then the high-level initiates would just step off the boat and walk up the grand causeway and through the pillars into the temple, which is in front of the main pyramid.
Spiritual connections would nourish the initiates, instilling a sense of peace and purpose. These elegant columns are carved from solid granite.
There's something about these black floors that you just imagine them being polished and the beauty in here.
Similarly, you can see a beautiful black floor in the temple to the east of the Great Pyramid. The rituals of ancient Egyptians were dictated by the stars. For example, the ancients tracked the movement of the most prominent star in the night sky, Sirius. Through watching night after night, season after season, they realized that this star would drop below the horizon and remain out of sight for 70 days each year. Its return was awaited with anticipation because it coincided with the flooding of the Nile.
Now, what happens during those 70 days? Well, if you observe the sky, you will notice that the sun reaches a certain point in its apparent cycle along the zodiac. It's somewhere above Orion at the beginning of the 70 days. And it drifts approximately a degree every day towards the constellation of Leo. So the 70 days are bracketed by Leo and a point somewhere above Orion. That point is where the Pleiades are. In the sky it's very clear. I mean, we know what happens in the 70 days. Now, assuming on the ground that the three stars are represented by the three pyramids of Giza, and that the temple of Heliopolis represents the constellation of Leo, then you have another feature. You have the Nile that separates them both. Similarly in the sky, the sun at the beginning of these 70 days is about to cross the Milky Way and head towards Leo. So if you take the three stars of Orion's belt as being the three pyramids, then you have a scale. You know their distance, and therefore you know the stellar scale that you're talking about. And if you use that scale, you work on the same scale, then the position of Abu Sir fits the Pleiades. And surprisingly, there are 6 pyramids there, and there are 6 or 7 stars there, and they seem to be in a cluster. And indeed, the sun's path is just below the Pleiades. It's not through them, just below them. And odd enough, we find the sun temples just below the Abu Sir pyramids. So we've got sun temple to sun temple. I now call it sun stations. It looks like these were the stations that on the ground the solar king performed these 70 days rituals. A bit like the stations of the cross. So you can see them in a much more archaic and grandiose way. The king went along to these stations, if you like, to perform his rituals, his passion.